SBU is the Spina Bifida Association's new viral education program. Our goal is to bring the world's best care providers and resources directly into your home. SBU is the only free webinar series dedicated solely to the educational, employment, social, self-advocacy, and health needs of people with spina bifida. We hope that you will enjoy today's presentation, Proper Wheelchair and Seating, and that you take time to complete the evaluation at the close of the presentation.
I'm going to get started. My name is Joe Teamy, and I'm an ATP CRTS. And I don't know if anybody knows that, but if you're trying to get a wheelchair, one of the most important things you should do is get a person who's qualified in fitting a wheelchair. A lot of people get wheelchairs from, they say they go to a wheelchair clinic, they say they go to a dealer, whatever, this and that, but there is a certification out there that you can get. So the first thing, if I'm ever going to get a wheelchair for my child, I'm going to go in and, are you an ATP? That means Assistive Technology Supplier, or Practitioner, Assistive Technology Practitioner. And so the same thing if you guys go to a doctor, if you have a therapist or whatever, you guys don't go to a doctor who says, oh, I've always wanted to cut up on a child, right? No, you want to go to someone who is certified. And there's a certification in the wheelchair industry. It's ATP. Now, if you can find an ATP, that's good. If you can find an ATP CRTS, that's a Certified Rehab Technology Supplier, that means I've been an ATP for 2 years, I know what I'm doing, I paid another $500 for another certification, and now I am a Certified Rehab Technology Supplier. And the nice thing about getting a Certified Rehab Technology Supplier to do your wheelchair for you is that if I screw up, and if I tell you, well, that's the only way that chair comes, or that's the only thing that you can get through your insurance company, if I do really bad measurements, you can report me to an agency that will take away my CRTS. And if everybody would go to a certified wheelchair specialist to buy their wheelchairs, then that CRTS would be important, and I wouldn't want it taken away. But right now, has anyone ever heard of a CRTS? Anybody heard of one? You did. Great. That's exciting, because right now it's a certification that I've never had a single person come up to me and say, Joe, before you do a wheelchair for my child, are you a CRTS? And I would just love it if someone would do that. So that's the first thing, we like to be certified. Now, in a wheelchair, the things that I'm going to talk over today is there's three things that are very, very, I just busted this thing. Maybe I turn it on again. I move around a lot, so I'm going to mess up your mic. If I do, just yell at me. Okay, there's three things that we're going to cover today that a wheelchair should be. First off, a wheelchair should be functional. Very, very important. And you would be amazed. Functional to me means that when I push this wheelchair, I can push this wheelchair with the least amount of effort, with the least amount of ease, so that this chair requires hardly no energy from me to propel it. That I can get in and out of this chair, that I can get up to tables, desks, transfers, things like that. The chair must be functional. And you're probably all thinking, well, duh, yes. But you'd be amazed how many wheelchairs are non-functional. We've seen a lot of them already here at the convention. Second, the chair should be comfortable. You should be able to sit comfortably in your chair. You should be able to sit in your chair and be comfortable. And we're going to go over that. And you would be amazed how many people I've run into that says, this chair, the back hurts, it's not comfortable, I don't like this and that. Chairs can be comfortable. And third, I think a chair should look good. When I'm sitting, because I'm an able-bodied person, but this is a chair I designed for myself because I do so many talks on wheelchairs. And when you look at me in this chair, what do you see? You see me. That's making a chair look good, making it to where I'm the focus, not my wheelchair. You'd be amazed how many wheelchairs, you see the big, bulky wheelchair and everything. And one of the neat things about wheelchairs is, you guys, I know I'm at Disney down in Florida now, and Disney has a lot of marathons. Do you guys know who wins the marathon every year down at Disney? You know who wins it every year? Who wins it? I know Sean knows it. Of course he knows. He's heard my talk 10, 12 times. It's a person in a wheelchair. But you know, the person in the wheelchair gets disqualified because they have the ability to get around better in a wheelchair than we do with our own two legs. And so whenever I'm fitting a wheelchair, I want to make sure that that person in that wheelchair is going to get around better than an able-bodied person. And a wheelchair can make a huge, huge difference. That's why we make sure they're going to be functional, comfortable, and look good. And that's one of the neat things. The wheelchair that I'm sitting in, the wheelchair that Kim's sitting in, the wheelchair Sean's sitting in, the neat thing about these wheelchairs is I can put this chair together 10,000 different ways. This chair, this brand, different tires, different sizes, different backs, different accessories, different ways. That's the good news. So a wheelchair can be put together 10,000 different ways. The bad news is there's 9,999 ways to make this chair not as functional for me when we go over it. So we're going to go over a lot of the things on the wheelchair to make a chair more functional. And we're going to keep in mind mainly for someone with spina bifida, of course. Now, when you notice that this chair, one of the things that is very, very important, if I have spina bifida, a lot of people with spina bifida have a shorter trunk. They a lot of times have different leg lengths, things like that. In order for me to propel this wheelchair as easy as possible, notice my shoulders aren't going up, they're not going way down, they're staying nice and level, nice movement on my wheels for this chair is getting a good position for my arm. Now when I put my elbow at 90 degrees like this here, and I'm sitting up nice and straight, notice that my elbow is just above the rear wheel. And that's where it's supposed to be. When I propel this chair, my elbow must be within 1 to 2 fingers above the top of the tire. Now we even ran into someone here already at the convention, and her elbows were all bruised up. And I says, wow, your elbows are really bruised. She says, yeah, I pushed my wheelchair with my elbows because she had actually, her elbows were below the tire. She had to come up like this, and that's how she was pushing her wheelchair. Not very functional. Or even if she used her arms, she had to go up like this. And so that's a good position. As parents of someone with spina bifida, when you get a wheelchair, these are things I want you to check on the chair. Now if the vendor says, well, that's the only way that chair comes, no, it doesn't, because a chair can be put together 10,000 different ways. They just missed one of them. And it might be a minor adjustment and things like that. And there's some different things that we can do. And the way I get the measurements for where my elbow should be is a seat to floor height. Seat to floor height, which is, we abbreviate it to STFH, means the height from the floor to the top of my cushion. Now, you'd be amazed how many times people will get a wheelchair, they'll do all the measurements, and they forget, oh yeah, you have to have a cushion on there. And as soon as they throw a cushion on it, if they didn't get the right seat to floor height with the cushion, guess what? Now it picks me up too high. I've got 4 fingers between the top of here, and now instead of giving nice big circles for pushing my chair, I want to do this. And how efficient is this for pushing a wheelchair? Not very efficient. Then I have shoulder pains, problems, and you'll get to the where you're not going to be as active in a chair. And so that's important when you get that seat, top of the seat, whatever cushion I'm going to have. And some cushions are 2 inches thick, some cushions are 3 inches thick. And I've had a few people measure, I measured for wheelchairs already at the convention here, and I will say, if you're going to keep this cushion, this thickness cushion, this will be your seat to floor height, and it's always to the back here. So if I'm going to get a wheelchair for someone, those are some measurements I really want to know. What is my rear seat to floor height? And that's because I want my elbow to be 1 to 2 fingers at the top of the tire. And then consider the cushion on there. Now, a lot of the things that you can get on a wheelchair, there's also on seat to floor height. There's also a front seat to floor height. That's from the floor to the front of the frame of the chair. And just as an FYI, we usually change that by 1 inch. So if my back seat to floor height was, say, 18.5, my front will be 1 inch higher, 19.5. And all that does is give me a little bit of a wedge so I can sit back into my chair. So that as I'm moving, doing different things, stuff like that, I'm not going to be flying out of my chair. If the chair was totally flat, sometimes I feel a little bit unstable. In fact, if you ever seen a wheelchair, a tennis wheelchair, they wedge them at about 7 inches. They're stuck back in there, so when they go to hit the racket, they don't go flying around in their chair. But that's hard to get in and out of. The more you wedge it, the harder it is for me to get in and out of my chair. So seat to floor height, rear and front. And if I do a measurement of a wheelchair for you, I will write those measurements down for you exact. To say for your child, for the person you want a wheelchair, This is going to be your rear seat to floor height. This is going to be your front seat to floor height because I'm checking the 2-inch measurement here. Very important measurement. Another important measurement, particularly for the pediatric market, and when I say pediatric market, I'm thinking for the little kids, your very first wheelchair, if you're 2, 3 years old, 4 years old, wherever you start in a wheelchair, is center of gravity. Center of gravity is a measurement that you want to check on every wheelchair, and that means if I drew a line from the floor up through the middle of my axle, all the way up through the ceiling, and if there is an imaginary line here, you want to make sure that some of my weight is behind that back axle, and some of the weight is in front of that back axle, because this is a machine. It's a machine to pull my 170-pound body around with the least amount of effort. And in a pediatric market, a lot of times, what they would do is they would go with these growing chairs. They call these zippy growing chairs. If someone says, get a growing chair for your child, run. Don't use those chairs, like the worst chairs that you can get for the pediatric market, because they put the wheels back here, they move the backs way forward like this, and the center of gravity, if you run that line across it, the child's entire weight is in front of the back axle, nothing behind it, and you're front loaded on the front casters. And if I go to push a chair like that, notice that my chair doesn't move anymore, and as a child with less strength, it makes it a lot worse. And so we want to make sure that when you get a chair, you have proper center of gravity, and that's where some of the weight is behind it, some of the weight is in front of it. Now, me being an able-bodied person and being good with my chair, and the chair fits me real well, I do have probably about 60% of my body weight in front, 40% in the back. If I was a person that would, you don't want to get it perfect, would be 50-50, but then if you lean backwards, you'd flip backwards. And every now and then we do run into a chair here at the conference. We just adjusted one a couple hours ago for a young lady where her wheels were too far forward, and so she was nervous going up ramps because she's afraid of flipping backwards. So we adjusted it back for her a little bit. But most of the chairs we've adjusted so far at the conference, we're moving the wheels way forward because the weight was way in the back. And that makes a huge difference on how the chair rolls and moves. And that's so important because a wheelchair, when you do a wheelchair for someone, not only does it affect that person, but it affects the entire family. I know I ran into a young lady, she was just graduated from high school, and she was in a wheelchair, and it was the same wheelchair she had all the way through junior high and high school, and the chair was long, they adjusted the back way forward, she had a horrible center of gravity. Therefore, and her mom was always telling her, go faster, do better. How come you're so slow at your chair? Well, when I went and seen her, I says, well, the center of gravity's all wrong. And I says, here, try my chair, because I've got a better center of gravity. She jumped in my chair, and she figures, well, I got to give it a real big push to try to impress Joe, impress my mom. And because the chair had such good center of gravity, she took off, and she almost ran into the other side of the wall in her living room. And it was like, wow. And I got thinking, I asked that young lady, okay, now that you graduate from high school, what are you going to do for the rest of your life? You know what her answer was? Nothing. She wasn't going to do nothing. And I wonder if it was because of that wheelchair, the bad center of gravity, she couldn't get around, she couldn't be motivated, she couldn't do things. Therefore now, when she could be contributing, she decided to do nothing. And I wish if I could do her chair for her when she was in junior high, if it would make a huge difference on her. And a wheelchair fit makes a huge difference. And I've got another young lady about the same time. I got her when she was still in high school. And in high school, she was about a sophomore in high school, and her grandfather actually came to my talk and said, you got to talk to my granddaughter. She's got a chair, bad center of gravity, bad two-finger test, and you got to adjust her chair. So I said, okay. So I went out to her house, teenage girl. Juan said, hey, I'm going to change your chair. It's going to make a difference in your life. You're going to be much more active. You're going to do things. And as a normal teenage girl, she said, yeah, whatever. And she was just totally bored. Her grandpa said, just let him try it. And she said, there's no way a wheelchair is going to make a difference. She had a seat depth that was too deep. She slouched in her chair, and she moved real slowly. So I took her chair, changed the center of gravity, made sure the two-finger test, got her sitting up like this, and adjusted for her. Well, she came back to the National Spina Bifida Conference the next year. I've been doing this for a while. And she sat up and she was bubbly, she was happy, and she says, "Joe, I hate you." And I says, "What? How come?" "Because you were right." And she says when she sat up like this, people looked at her differently. They treated her differently. Instead of doing nothing in high school, she got involved in all kinds of things. She got involved in activities. She was so excited with life again because she could get around just as fast as everybody else. And she started doing so much more. She went on to college, and she is a very successful young lady. She travels all over the place now because she changed her wheelchair and just changed a few measurements. So that's why a lot of these things, seat to floor height, seat measurements, things are so important. Now, seat depth, that's a measurement that's really hard for people to get, particularly in the pediatric market. Because the problem with seat depth, if I sit in this chair like this, you can get a decent seat depth measurement. But what if I sit like this? A lot of kids will slouch, things like that. So never, ever measure me in a wheelchair. What you want to do is get me out of my wheelchair and make sure I sit on a bench or a table to where you can get that measurement. Now, there is a little clue that I do give. I do teach some students at a university on proper measurement of wheelchairs, and I always have the students measure each other because seat depth is the most important measurement. And I know back 2 or 3 conferences ago, my little utility knife, we probably cut a couple dozen chairs because the seat depths were too deep. And a lot of people say, well, they're going to grow into it. No, a child doesn't grow into a chair. You must have that child sitting up properly right from the start. And so whatever the seat depth measurement is a lot of times the same as their lower leg. So if you can, it's hard for you to, if you measure the lower leg, and like on my measurement it's 16 inches, therefore my seat depth should be 16 inches. And that works out for a lot of the younger kids in measuring a chair to make sure the seat depth is in there proper. I know I ran into one young lady today, her seat depth was off by 2 inches. And it's kind of funny when I said, "Yeah, your seat depth's off by 2 inches." And she said, "Yeah, my dad wants to know why I'm not sitting up in my chair." She's sitting back like this here. So I pulled her out of her chair, and guess what? She had 2 inches cut in the sling of the seat, which I recognized. I said, "I cut this for you a year or so ago, didn't I?" She says, "Yeah, it worked out good then." And what happened is she got a new cushion, and instead of putting the cushion back where I had cut her seat depth, she put it all the way to the front. Therefore, she was sitting real bad. Pulled her out of her chair, notched her cushion, put it in the back. She sat back up again, solved a lot of the problems. And so seat depth is a very important measurement. So we've got center of gravity, we've got seat to floor height, and we've got seat depth measurements. If you can get those on the chair, that helps out a lot. Now, a lot of times there's also hip measurements. How big do I want a wheelchair? And my hips measure 16 inches, but my wheelchair is a 15-inch wide chair because I like to be as small and as compact as possible. And sometimes for the pediatric market, when we're working with those first kids, we'll measure those little hips about 8, 9 inches. And a lot of times, we have to go about 2 inches wider just to allow for growth. Because when we are working with kids in a chair, we want a chair that's going to last 5 years. And that's kind of the norm, 5 years to last for a child. Now, as long as I'm talking seat depth, this is one of my favorite wheelchairs for the pediatric market. Every time, pretty much the majority of the time when I run into a child that's 3 to 4 years old and if they have spina bifida, this is the chair that I'm going to work for them. And with this chair, a 12-inch wide chair will a lot of times get it to where they can last for 3, 4, 5, 6 years, 5 years a lot of times because we don't grow as much in the hips as we do in the legs. And so I try to keep the chairs for the younger kids. I might add an inch. As we get older in that, sometimes I'll even go narrow an inch. I was at the University of Pittsburgh, and there was a person there with a spinal cord injury, and his hips measured 14.5 inches, and he wanted a chair that was only 12.5 inches wide because he wanted to be really, really narrow to zip in and around. So just when we do hip measurements, sometimes we have to add a little bit for the small kids, but we have to be real careful because we want to make sure that if I put a child of 3 or 4 years old in a chair, the first thing you want them to do is put their arms down and touch the hand rims. That's the first things they should touch. And if they're not touching the hand rim like this, then the chair is probably not appropriate. If they have to go way out like this, if they hit things. But I always will put a child in a chair, and as soon as their elbows come down, first thing they should do is touch hand rims. Because we don't want kids touching the rubber of the wheels. Because most kids, if I touch the rubber of the wheels, where do they put their hands? In their mouths. And that's what it's bad. When you touch the rubber, it goes from there. And that's one of the things on my chair here. Notice that I put a guard on the tire. There's a guard covering this tire so that my first kids, when I first put them in a wheelchair, there's no way they can touch the rubber of that wheel. And so I teach my kids right away from 2, 3 years old, use the hand rims. If you can start from there, it's amazing how successful they can be in the future. But that's important, getting all your right measurements and everything so that you can put side guards like that on there. So with hip measurements, what I'm saying, if it's a young child, sometimes we'll add an inch or so. But sometimes what we can do is we can angle the tires in a little bit and then bring them out. That's called camber, so that we can stay with the chair a little bit wider and then bring them out. There's a lot of little tricks that you can do so that even if you have a 3 or 4-year-old, you can get them into a nice chair like this here. Another thing, like seat depth, what I said with kids, what we always do is we just put a solid board on there. Solid board. It's going to be a board like that. We put solid boards on everything, but I'll go into that a little bit later. But you can slide it 3, 4 inches underneath the chair so that as the child grows, the seat comes out, the footrests come out, and you can get a perfect center of gravity, a perfect chair for someone. And the fit is more important than anything. I mean, that's one of the things people say, well, the E-Tex thing, it's a chair that's from Europe, it's hard. What about this chair? What about that chair? I really don't care what frame you get, as long as you get the good measurements, a good system on there. What I don't want to do is find a chair where the child can't even reach the hand rims. The wheels are way back here. The center of gravity is off. The seat to floor heights are off. They failed the 2-finger test here, where the elbow is 2 fingers above the elbow, just like that. I really don't care about the frame as much. There are some things I do like on this chair, because like the foot platform, this chair here is set up to where a lot of kids will climb in, crawl from the ground into their chair. This is a chair I can stand on the footrest and it won't flip over. So there's some neat things on here. I like stroller handles on a chair to where I can hide them. Because if I'm a 3 or 4-year-old boy, when I'm at school, things like that, out in the playground, I don't want stroller handles on my chair. I want to be able to propel, get around. I want to be cool. But when I'm with Mom and we're at the mall, it's kind of nice to have a stroller handle that then does come up like this here. So it's a neat little chair, great center of balance, easy to roll, easy to propel. But it's because it has all the properties that I like in a chair. It's a neat little chair. I know Quickie's got a Zippy Zone chair, which I just seen for the first time here at the conference, and that has a lot of nice features on it too. I like the Colors chair. Colors chair has some nice growability to it, things like that. So I don't care which brand chair you get as much. I like the Tie-Lite chairs. I like a lot of chairs. The only ones I don't like are the ones that you can't get good measurements on. Like wheels way up here. I know that was a bad tire. But that was a nice chair. You started the Tie-Lite chair. It just was put together all wrong, unfortunately. Now you notice also, like on tires, one of the things on tires, the bigger the tire, the better the chair is going to roll. So I always start with at least a 22-inch tire for all my little kids. For as they get to be a little bit older, I go right away to a 24-inch tire. And I think I've only seen one of them this year. There are some wheelchairs that the kids are really low down to the ground, really tiny little tires on them. I don't know if you've seen any of those wheelchairs. Sometimes vendor will say, for the first year, preschool, kindergarten, we'll get you a little kiddie cart chair. And stay away from those because they're really tiny tires. And if you see one of those around, you'll notice that the child, all they do is touch the rubber. And if they're touching the rubber, it's not very sanitary because it goes in their hands again. And the other thing, those little chairs, if you've ever tried getting them, they're very, very hard to push because they got small tires. They go really, really slow. I remember several years ago, I was here at the National Spina Bifida Conference. It was first thing in the morning, and you guys will know first thing in the morning, you got to rush to one of your classes and everything. This lady was carrying a little boy in her arms, and another little boy was in the wheelchair with the real little wheels, real down close to the ground. And the lady was rushing to her class, and the little boy was trailing behind you, just pushing and pushing and pushing and saying, "Mom, slow down, slow down." And I thought, well, that's kind of rude of her. Here she's at the Spina Bifida Conference. She's going real fast, and her son can't even keep up with her. until she stopped, looked at the child in the chair, and she says, now you know what your brother has to go through. It was the able-bodied child who was in the wheelchair. The child with spina bifida was being carried in her arms. And I felt like turning to her and saying, now you know about a non-functional wheelchair, that even an able-bodied person can't get around the chair, therefore you shouldn't do it. And I've talked to a lot of preschool teachers and kindergarten teachers, and I've noticed that they say that when the kids come into class, the first thing they do is take them out of their chairs and put them in little chairs, things like that, and the wheelchair goes out in the hallway. So when the vendor says, well, we like these little chairs because they're with their peers, that only works out for a year or two. And they aren't hardly ever used in the classroom, therefore there's not a whole lot of purpose. They're cute, but they're not functional at all. You really lose your function on that chair. And I seen a little child one time who bought a chair. By the time they did the funding and everything, he got it when he was in kindergarten. He had to keep it then for 5 years. So that means he showed up in first grade and second grade with that tiny little chair. And the kid was a little cute, and all the other kids that were standing, oh, the kid's so cute. And believe me, at first grade, I don't want to be cute. I want to be a big boy. And so again, chairs are not functional if they're really low to the ground. You can't really function. Now, I did have a person that, whenever I say don't, that means majority of the time. I did have one child where the parent wanted the chair down to the ground because he was going to use it in preschool, and I made that father promise me that this chair will only last 2 years for your child. That's it. At the end of 2 years, if your insurance company says, well, you've used up your benefit, it's supposed to last 5 years, that you will personally pay for a new wheelchair for your child in 2 years. And so that's the only time I would ever sell it, where it made a special situation and they wanted it. So, in every situation, you have to look at your child, look at the situation, and I think all of you want your kids to be as functional as possible, as active as possible. I think that's very, very important. Okay, so we covered a lot of different things on the chair. Hip width, seat depth, how to do seat depth, center of gravity, seat to floor heights. Those are all important things. One of the things that you'll notice, none of these chairs have armrests on the chairs. And you'd be amazed how many kids, a lot of times they'll put armrest on the chair, and I'll say, why do you have the armrest? In fact, I just pulled off a pair of armrests off someone earlier today. And I asked her, why do you have armrests? And she says, oh, I have armrests because I need to rest and support sometimes because I get tired. And I said, oh, really? And I says, put your elbows on her armrest. And a lot of times for kids, these arms are so high, she had to put her elbow up, and she did this. She scrunched her shoulders to put her elbows up on the armrest. I says, well, that doesn't look very comfortable. And she just said, oh, well, I didn't realize that. I took her armrest away from her, and then she could bring her elbows down. She could reach her hand rims easier. She could propel much easier. And I says, how about if you give me these for the day, come back at the end of the day, and if you still want them, I'll give them back to you. Guess what I still have? Her armrest. Got a couple pair. In fact, every year, what do? Collect about a half dozen of these? Of course, the nice thing is, this year, we did a talk for the senior high school kids and everything. No arms on any of the chairs. And I remember when I first started doing this talk back 12 years ago, almost every wheelchair had armrest on it. This year, no arms. So I'm kind of excited about that. It's starting to change and do that because you don't need armrest necessarily. You can swing, you can turn, you can move. I'm so much freer without armrest. So don't think your kids have to have arms. And now if there's an occupational therapist in the crowd, they're probably thinking, wait a minute, Joe, what about trays? Armrest, you need trays. And what I like to do is I like to ask you, how many kids in school walk around with trays to go in their class? None. So why should... That's not me, is it? I hope not. I don't think I got it going on.
Hi, I'm in Joseph.
Oh, Cam. Anyway, so trays. What I want my child to do, I want my child to go to a table or a desk just like all the other kids. I don't want them carrying a tray. If they put a tray on me, what does that do? It says, hey, look, Joe's disabled. He can't do as well as anybody else. Cuts me in half. Now, there are some kids we have to have trays on, and so I have developed a tray that will fit on these side guards for that occupational therapist. So if you have an occupational therapist, you have to have trays. There's ways of doing things. There's ways of adjusting things and adapting things. but let's not take away independence. And if I have a tray on this chair, think I can reach the wheels, think I can self-propel, there's a lot of negative things to things. I mean, with all wheelchair parts, there's positives and there are negatives, and that's where you as a parent have to decide. What are the positives of this thing I do? What are the negatives? And then you decide, you make the decision on why you get that wheelchair, this wheelchair, whatever. So trays, armrests, I don't like them. There's a lot of things I don't like on a chair. I don't like a lot of things on a chair. I think the less it's on the chair, again, the better it is for you in getting out and around. The other thing, smaller casters. And that's one of the things I've noticed this year. Everybody has smaller wheels. You would have gone back 10, 12 years ago, a lot of the wheelchairs had big wheels. If you have a big wheel in the front of your chair, it brings your feet out. You can't tuck your feet in. And again, if I can bring my feet in, tuck my feet in, because I've got a small caster, it allows me to get around, maneuver, and turn better. And they've even got casters now, like this one on this chair, that is a little bit bigger, it's a little bit wider, and it gets over your cracks, bumps, threshold, things like that. If you are in an area where you need a little bit wider tire, but it doesn't have to be bigger. We can still stay smaller. So we like to put small casters in the front, big ones in the back, as long as you can pass the two-finger test. Very, very important. Don't get the tires too big when you don't pass the test on that. In fact, I've got someone who would love to exchange wheels with you. I got someone who's got 22-inch tires, and it's an adult, and she can hardly reach her wheels. And I got thinking, I just seen a child with 24-inch tires who can hardly reach because they're too high. So I have to get together with you. So switch them out. Anyways, so tires. So we got tires, no armrest. I don't use elevating leg rest. Rigid frame chairs. I like rigid frame chairs a lot because a rigid frame chair is more true square. It rolls better and easier. And we used to have a lot of people that had folding chairs. And you won't see folding chairs as much anymore because this chair here, even though it's rigid, look at how small and compact this chair is. Now it's not big, square, and boxy. Don't get a rigid frame chair that's big, square, and boxy. Get one that's nice and small and compact. And again, this is a Tylite chair. They have like 10 different brands of Tylite chairs. So just because you get an aluminum or a titanium chair doesn't mean you're going to get a nice functional one. Make sure and look at the brand, each one of them, get one that fits the best. And so I do like rigid frame chairs better than folding chairs. And even this chair here, this is a rigid frame chair. The back folds down. The wheels come off, and it's amazing. I can fit these chairs in the trunk of a car, a lot more rigid frame chairs in the trunk of a car than I can a folding chair. So don't think just because a chair doesn't fold that it won't fit in the trunk of the car. Nowadays, they're so small, so compact, it's amazing what you can do with the chairs here. So we got seat width, we got seat depth, we got seat to floor height, footrest tucked in, small tires in the front, bigger tires in the back, even hand rims. I don't know if you notice that this is a hand rim that's agronomically correct. It's oblong. It has a block here, so I can't even get my thumb in between here. As opposed to, oh, that's one too. That's right, I switched tires with someone already today. So they took my tire, as opposed to a round hand rim. So we're finding round hand rims aren't the same. The other thing too is hand rims that are too close together. I had a little girl in Jacksonville who got a chair like this here. It fit her, everything was perfect, but the vendor had the hand rim in too close to the wheel. And so she used the chair a couple times, and the mom came to me back, and she says, my daughter won't use the chair anymore. Would you mind looking at it? No one can figure out what the problem is. I looked at it with the hand rim in there. She tore her thumb. Right. She smashed her thumb, and she didn't break it, but sprained it real bad, hurt it. So anytime she associated the wheelchair, she associated with her bad thumb. I says, well, they messed up on the wheels. I spaced the spacer out, and I just talked to the lady. She just called me today, also Spina Bifida. She didn't come to the conference, but she says her daughter now loves the chair. She's flying up and down the hallways, doing all kinds of things with it. And so I got to go look at her again to readjust it for her. So little things like that. I mean, there's just so many things in a wheelchair that a lot of people miss. And when you look at a chair, you see a child in a chair, just think what you think. What's logical? What's easy? Does your thumb go in and out of there easily? Well, this one you'd never get it. But you don't ever want the hand rims in too close. Some people say, well, we put the hand rims in close so you get through a narrower door. Well, that's not the widest part of the wheelchair. The widest part's down here. So that doesn't make any difference on whether your hand rims are out or in. Keep your hand rims out. Now, that's the frames of the chairs. That's 50% of your battle. You get a good frame, good-sized chair, your child fits in the chair. And that's one thing, too. If you see a chair, if a vendor says, well, this XYB chair is the best chair for your child, show me the chair. Let me see the chair. Put together a model. And that's one of the things. I've got a lot of chairs here, and all manufacturers love to send you wheelchairs. So a lot of medical supply dealers, if it's something that if I came to your house and I said, I really like this E-Tech Sting, you've never seen one before, say, hey, Joe, show it to me. Put it together. Show me how it fits up. Put it together for my child. Make a vendor do stuff like that, because you can do that, you can try it. And then, too, if I bring the chair and it doesn't fit, the elbows are too high, too low, don't accept it. A lot of people think that just because I did a custom chair, therefore I have to accept it. And a lot of people think, well, I really wanted a red chair. This is red. I'll just accept it. Once you accept it and once you sign, you got to keep that chair for 5 years, unless you want to buy another one. And each one of these chairs are a couple $1,000s, so they are not inexpensive. So don't take and don't accept chairs that are bad. And if the dealer says, hey, this is your chair, it's a custom chair, it has to be it, if you don't agree with it, don't accept it. And if you get it to where you don't accept things, it's going to make dealers like us do a lot better at chairs. And I've always asked people, why did you accept the chair? Well, I never liked it, but it was a pretty red one. I really wanted a red one. Well, that's not a reason. And it's better to delay it for another month or two and then get the proper fitting chair. Very, very important. Now, once you get to the frame, there's the seating. Now, the first thing that I put on every wheelchair that I design is I put a solid board. I don't use sling seats. Now, up here, you probably can't tell, but my sling seat is bowed like this. And everybody has a left and a right side neglect. If I sit in my wheelchair and I'm slouching in my chair, and you guys come along and say, Joe, sit up, I'm very strong in my left hand, so I'm going to sit up like this. My left hip's going to go down into the sling. My right hip is going to be up on the seat rail, and now all of a sudden, I've developed an 1.5 inch obliquity. So what's going to happen? The therapist is going to then want to throw a lateral here, and pretty soon I'm all boxed up in my chair. The first thing in seating and positioning is sit on a level seat. And I had a young girl come into me, and she had a really bad cushion, very, very soft, and then she was concerned about scoliosis and everything, and I showed the mother, look at her seat is unlevel. You can't level the body unless you have a level seat. And every able-bodied person in here, how many of us are sitting on sling seats? Here? No. At work? No. Movie theaters, restaurants, stores? We would never, ever sit on a sling seat. But you'd be amazed how many people will give a sling seat to a person in a wheelchair, and then you don't have a level pelvis. And so I make sure there's a solid board on every chair I do. I get rid of the slings, and I put in a solid board. So it's level. There's no way I can get a nice propelling push with my chair if I don't have a level seat. So I start everyone with solid boards. Now, I like solid boards on hardware that I can adjust up and down. And the reason I do that is if I change cushions, I go from a 2-inch cushion to a 3-inch cushion, and I've got a perfect elbow position here with a 2-inch cushion. I sit on a 3-inch cushion, now my elbow's up too high. If I have hardware on my solid board, I can adjust it down. I can adjust it up. If I'm off a 1/2 inch, different things like that. So anytime I do a solid board, I put it on a hardware system like this. This is a metal bracket. They come at 0 drop hooks, 1-inch drop hooks, 2-inch drop hooks, 3-inch drop hooks, adjustable drop hooks, anything there, because I want my board secured on my chair, and I want it at the perfect height for everything. So this is the first thing to do on every chair. I recommend it. I put solid boards on my Stings. I put them on every chair I do. I put solid boards on. And that rule is probably almost 100%. Out of 1,000 wheelchairs, maybe I'll use one sling seat. It'll be for a person who is concerned about the weight of it and is maybe driving and they're lifting it, and that might throw them off. But that's very, very, very rare that I would ever, never put a solid board on a chair. So first thing we're going to start is a solid base. The second thing For people with spina bifida, the contour of the spine is different. We're smaller in the lumbar area, thicker in the thoracic area. Don't look at the belly. I'm over 50. I'm allowed a belly. That happens. But with the back, what I do on all my chairs, I start out with an adjustable tension back. An adjustable tension back is a back that has straps on it. And the reason I do that is because then for the pelvis, I can get the pelvis back a little bit further. I can tighten up the lumbar. And when I push in my lumbar, guess what happens? My head comes up. And I can sit in the chair, and it gives me good postures. And so the first thing I'm going to start with all my kids, all my people in the wheelchairs, solid boards and adjustable tension backs. And that works out probably about 99% of the time. I don't use a straight sling back. And I don't use, we get in a lot of backs that I've seen a few of them here. They are a contoured back this way, but they're still flat up and down this way. Kind of like, you know, I've had people say, well, Joe likes contoured backs, and they'll get a back that's, whoops, sorry, contoured this way. That's not a contoured back, but it's still flat this way here. And we've seen some kids that are starting to get these backs like this. They're nice and contoured and rounded. And all they do is when you use a back like this, they're in their chairs, it's pushing them away from the wheels. And every one of the kids that we've seen so far here at the conference with a contoured back or some sort of back like this, every one of them failed the center of gravity test. Every one of them failed the two-finger test because the back actually messed up the entire chair. And they can sit so much better, so much more support with the adjustable tension back. And that's how we do it. Of course, the adjustable tension back has to be adjusted properly. We did adjust, we were up late last night with this one lady. She had an adjustable tension back. She had my notes, I do with all notes, went to her vendor, and her vendor made a mistake. They put the adjustable tension back on, but they didn't adjust it properly. And therefore, we adjusted it properly for her and everything, and I just seen her today before I came in here, and she thanked me that minor adjustment of me readjusting to adjust the back to fit her made a huge difference in the chair, and now she loves it. It's rolls and maneuvers. It's doing everything great. So that's one thing. Once you get the adjustable tension back, make sure that you allow the pelvis to come back in between the canes, and then you tighten up the lumbar, and then you can loosen up the thoracic a little bit. Just make it to fit the contour of the spine, because the spine is not straight. Now, if the adjustable tension back does not work, and they say your child does need better support, things like that, what I want you to remember is our backs are not flat. Do not ever use a straight back on your child. What you want to do is get a back that's contoured, that gives lumbar support, and follows the contour of the spine, whatever that contour of the spine is. Now, I had to fly in here to get to drive here, so I don't have all my samples, but I have a back that I made that starts out, angles back in the lumbar area, and then at the back of the shoulder blades comes in, and it looks like a spinal cord. And that works out for a lot of kids. So we start with the adjustable tension backs. If that doesn't work out, don't use flat backs. And I'm meaning flat, I call this a flat back that's flat here. It has to have some contour to it. And then, the only reason you want a solid back is probably because of laterals. We need lateral supports. If they say your child needs lateral supports, you must first put hip supports on. And there was I got all these examples here. There was a girl who they put a lateral support on her because she fell off to the side. And when they just put one lateral support, but they never put the hip supports on, so what happens, she leans to this side, her hips come out like this, and her legs come out like this, off to this side here. And it's all because, and I showed the mother, I says, look if you're going to put a lateral, put a hip block here, sat her up like this, she sat perfect. So I don't like laterals, I don't like any supports on my chairs, but if you have to use a lateral support, and that's where a therapist is involved, you want to notice if a therapist will tell you, if a child's constantly leaning to this side and cannot correct themselves to midline, to where they're starting to get a deformity to the side, then okay, we will put lateral supports on. But make sure you first secure the hips. Keep the hips in center, then you can put laterals. If you just put laterals on and you don't secure the hips, you're actually causing scoliosis. But again, the more support I put on a child, the more I'm going to limit their movement. And so if a child can bend like this and comes back like this to midline, but leans a little bit, I don't know if that justifies a lateral support. That's something you have to watch, because if I do put a lateral support, I do put hip supports, it's going to make independent transfers worse. There's a lot of things that are negative that you have to consider. And I always think if a person can correct themselves to do that. There are some other things you can do besides putting a rigid lateral support, sometime, some cueing pads or something that if they do start to lean, that something hits them in the side slightly and makes them bring them back to midline. But just don't put too much. We used to see so many kids that come with these straight backs, these laterals, these headrests and everything. And I've taken a lot of them off here, a lot of them off at the conference. Fortunately, this year, we haven't seen too many of them. We've seen a couple of them, but it's getting to where they are realizing they're not putting lateral supports, they're not putting hip supports on kids, they're not putting the straight backs. Sometimes I think the seating system causes more problems than it solves, because you'd be amazed how many times we'll try to block a child, and what they do, they come down and around because they don't like it. They need to turn their heads, they need to do things. So again, as you're putting a child in a chair, anytime you support them, support's the positive thing, but the negative thing is it locks their movement. So we want to do things like that. And make sure whatever we do doesn't limit their movement, like these laterals. If you are going to put a lateral on a child's chair, the lateral, this is a lateral, it's a swing-away lateral. It's used a lot in the industry. I don't ever use it. Never use it, never have used it, because it doesn't slide in, doesn't slide out. It's rigid. Now, I've seen some laterals that have a winter-summer, but it just has two positions. If I'm going to use a lateral, the lateral is going to be on a slide bracket that slides in and touches my body complete and brings my elbow down to where I can sit with my elbows down. If the lateral does not slide in and slide out to touch my body, like this one, this is a child in Washington, D.C. they had me go up and fix because he was sitting horrible in his chair. This lateral swings in and out, but there's no slide on it unless you have a bracket. And so it could come up close to him, whether he wore coats, sweaters, things like that. And so that's a very, very bad lateral. And so it came down, it would hit him in the side of his arm. He sat real strange looking, and of course he hated the chair. So if there is a lateral, make sure that if you do put a lateral support, again, we're going to secure the pelvis first, and a lateral support, I can still bring my elbows down, I can still function, I can still move my wheels, I can still do that. But again, in this population, I really don't like laterals, and I do take a lot more off than I do put. Which brings up to headrest. Don't use headrest. Kids don't need headrest. If you get a good support, you're sitting in the chair properly, you can balance the head over the pelvis, and you can sit up properly. Headrest mess up women's hair. They hate it. And with this headrest here, this is a headrest. We used to use headrests like this many, 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 many years ago. And we found out with the headrest that if you put this on a child, if they turn sideways, now I can't hear anymore. And so what we found kids would do, again, they would do this, and they get behind their headrest. So we try not to use headrest. Now, yes? Okay, that's a really good point. For on the bus, transportating school, sometimes people want to use a headrest for transportation only. For that, I will do it, and I'll use just a flat headrest. Nothing contoured, nothing big. But make sure as soon as you get off the bus, the child's off the bus, out of transport, the headrest comes off, and you use hardware that's flat. That's a real good point. I don't mind a headrest for transport, but I do not want a headrest on my chair here or anything like that, because again, the child has to explore their environment, has to turn, has to look, has to do things like that. And then there are harnesses. Harnesses, again, if the seating system is properly, if the child, everything is done right, you do not use harnesses. Most kids, if you put a harness on a child, they will lean into it. They actually do the opposite. But there's one thing that if they do, some school buses again, some schools say, well, Joe, you got to put a harness on all the kids' chairs for bus transportation. If you want to fight that fight, I will fight that fight for you. But if you don't want to, parents have to pick and choose what fight they want to do. If they say, okay, I'll put a harness on my child, if you ever do see a harness on a wheelchair, make sure the buckles are different brackets. This harness, if you come up, if you do look at it, if you look at it later, you'll notice that the top buckles and the bottom buckles are the exact same buckle. So that means that this harness gets off that child, someone doesn't watch, they snap it back on, upside down, around the neck. Very, very dangerous. So if there is a harness on your child's chair, make sure there's different buckles. Make sure it's impossible to turn it upside down. It's something that I have no idea why they manufacture harnesses like this. They use these down in Florida all the time. And it makes, I asked why, nobody will tell me why. But anyways, if you do ever get a harness, and if you do get a harness on a child for transportation, make sure when they get to school, take the harness off. Because you want the kids to see their shirts, they're supporting the Bears, the Cubs, whatever. You want to see that. You want to see their emblems. You want to see stuff. You don't want to use harnesses to block them up. And then cushions. Once you get the proper fit chair, make sure that you don't throw a cushion on there and mess up the cushion on it. And when it does come to cushion, because a lot of kids, a lot of people with spina bifida have skin breakdown. Therefore, you need a very, very good cushion. My favorite cushion for kids is the Corby cushion. My worst cushion for kids is the Corby cushion. And the reason for that is because the standard Corby cushion is very, very soft. You do not want a soft cushion for your kids. Your kids don't need a comfortable, a soft cushion. They've got good skin, they can sit, they're still small yet, they're in and out of their chairs. This is called a beefed up Corby. That's the difference. Beefed up Corby, it's firm. And one of the reasons I like a Corby cushion is because a lot of kids are incontinent. And so if this cushion's incontinent, it pulls moisture away from your child. It gives a little bit so you don't have the shearing. If you're in water, things like that, you go out swimming. If kids are in a sprinkler, they're going through the sprinkler, not around the sprinkler. Kids want to be kids. This cushion gets wet, it's real easy to dry. So it's a really nice cushion. You can cut it, you can adjust it. When I put them for my little kids, I notch the corners of the cushion so I can slide the cushion behind the child. As the child grows, the cushion can grow with the child. It's a neat little cushion, but it must be the beefed up cushion. I had a mother who showed me the chair. She says, yeah, I know you like the Corby cushion. She bought the standard one. And it was all collapsed. It was sitting horrible, and her child was starting to get a scoliosis because the cushion had collapsed. And it was only like 6 to 9 months old. I've had other kids come in here. They've got the beefed up Corby cushion. They've had them for 3, 4 years. It's just like brand new. And that. So it's a neat little cushion. Yes. They want to know how to spell the Corby cushion. It's C-O-R-B-E-E, but it's beefed up. They don't even give it a part number for the beefed up one. Must be beefed up. And so B-E-E-F-E-D, beefed up cushion. Or the cushion the way Joe likes it. That'll get it to you. So, now there are a lot of air cushions out there. Air cushions are one of the best pressure relief cushions. But again, a lot of people have a left and a right side deficit and neglect. So whenever I sell an air cushion, I usually sell a 2-valve. The reason I do a 2-valve because it splits it down the middle. So that if a child does sit one way or the other, you can kind of use the cushion to balance it out. And I've seen some people say, well, they go to 4 valves and different things. You go to more than 2 valves, you've ruined the integrity of the cushion. And in air cushions, you have to there's a lot of maintenance to it. You have to put the right pressure in. Too much pressure, it's going to mess up the seating system. Too low pressure, they bottom out. And so I don't like to go to air cushions unless I've got a real severe skin breakdown. The older kids, things like that. And I did do a spina bifida clinic up in Chicago at Children's Memorial Hospital where we had a lot of spina bifida kids through there. The head doctor at the spina bifida clinic said, Joe, anytime one of my kids come in here that's 13 years or older, they must have a pressure cushion. You know, I don't know if that's scientific or whatever, but I know there at Children's Memorial Hospital, every time a child got to be 13 years old, we automatically put them on pressure relief cushions. Doctor said so. So we used a lot of the Corby Stimuli cushions because they're maintenance free. If we had a severe problem, we sometimes would go to an air cushion and more maintenance. I like to stay away from gel cushions. I like to stay away from cushions that, you know, that don't hold, you know, the single valve cushions. I stay away from those a lot of times because they throw your balance off, things like that. But remember, if you use a cushion, it must fit the chair, the seat to floor height. You don't want to mess anything up from there. So it's very, very, very important on the cushions. Yeah, I grabbed everything there. So it's kind of, so you've got the wheelchair and you've got the seating systems. And if you can get both of those correct, It's amazing what you can do as far as allowing a person to be independent, how well they can move. And we've changed a lot of chairs over the last 12 years I've been doing this. You'd be amazed how many times we've changed chairs, adjusted chairs, wrote up orders for chairs for people to go back to their states to get the chairs, and how it's changed their lives. And it does change their lives. I know because my mom, she had MS. Since I was 10 years old, I grew up. She had multiple sclerosis. And when she had MS, she could get around a little bit, but she fatigued, things like that. And I realized that if she would have gotten into a bad chair, she couldn't have been part of my life. But because we got her a very good piece of equipment that she could be functional, she's very functional, she's very comfortable, and she could do, and it looked good, which was nice to have it because she was a young mother at that time. There's 6 of us kids. And we just had a great time with her. We did things with her. If someone would have put her in a wheelchair that didn't fit her, that was big, clumsy, bulky, something that she couldn't get around and be my mother, it would have affected her life. It would have also affected my life and my kids' life. And I know my kids, when they grew up, they knew my mom as a crazy grandmother that would do anything. And I know we had a few inconveniences at times with her because she had a wheelchair. I know one time in Indiana, I went on top of a sand dune with her, and it was kind of a problem going up a sand dune in a wheelchair. I don't know if you've ever done that before. We went 3 steps up, slid down 2, 3 steps up, slid down 2. But pretty soon someone came along. There's 3 guys, and we grabbed the corners of the chair because it was a nice lightweight chair. We dragged her to the top of the sand dune. It was a beautiful view up there, and it was great to do that with my mom. Coming down was another episode. It was really fast, and we came down, sand flying, everything. And I know my mom at that time, she couldn't use her arms, couldn't use her legs. She was basically in the chair permanently. And she had a one-on-one aide. And the one-on-one aide had to change her, do things, and everything. And I was out in the hall waiting for my mom if we brought her back from the sand dune episode. And the aide goes out and she goes, "Joe?" And I says, "What?" "Where were you with your mom today?" And I says, well, why?" "Well, her underwear is full of sand." I said, "Well, on top of the sand dune." But we do things like that. It's just because she had MS, it didn't limit my life. I could do so much. And that's why I'm so passionate about wheelchairs. That's why when wheelchairs are an inch too deep, a half inch too deep, the center of gravity is off, things like that. Yes, I do see that. It does bother me because if I can get that chair perfect, that's going to allow that person to be so much more functional and do more things. And it's just huge for the whole family when you have a functional chair. I had a mother one time where she had one of these growing chairs. Her child had spina bifida. And in the growing chair, she couldn't push the chair real well. Her daughter didn't do hardly anything. And it was just real frustrating for her. So she ended up buying like an E-Tech Sting for her chair. I fit the child for the chair and everything. And her child was like about 5 years old. They came back to the conference the next year. There was 2 kids with the growing chairs. That same year that they had it. The one changed to an E-Tech Sting, and she was going all over the conference. She was doing everything. She was very, very active. The other child, who had the growing chair, sat and did nothing. And the mother and the mother of the child who wasn't very mobile came up to me later and said, "Yeah, I missed your conference last time. I didn't get my child a good chair." And I'm kind of sad because this other lady came up and said, "I thought last year those 2 girls were the same age." But she said it's obvious that the child in the active chair is older and more mature, which is because they didn't give the other child a chance to be active and do things. And so it's very, very important to get a good active chair for your child. It makes a difference at 3 years old, at 4 years old, at 5 years old, on into the future. And if you can do that, you're going to have an active young adult. And that's what we need, especially as we get older. We want our kids to take care of us instead of us having to take care of them. And it will happen if you go from there. Now, a few other things I do want to mention. That's basically it. Does anyone have any questions on a wheelchair, manual chair? Because I got just a couple other things I want to wrap up with. And then after my talk, if you want to talk one-on-one on a particular situation with a wheelchair or something, or if you want me to write up an order for you to take back to your state, whatever, with my ideas, I'd love to educate parents on wheelchairs. Because the more educated you are on wheelchairs, the better we're going to work, the harder we as a wheelchair vendor is going to work for you. And that's very, very important to know why you're getting certain things. Kim's up here in the front, and all day tomorrow I'm going to be in room 207, and we will adjust chairs, we will look at chairs, we'll do anything. And if you want an appointment to just talk on me one-on-one, you can talk to Kim and she'll slot you in for a half an hour time. And then we will adjust and we will talk on your chair one-on-one because it's kind of hard in a group like this. But we will be glad to do that for you. But one of the chairs I brought is these power assist chairs. They're kind of cool. This is one of the best power assist chairs I've ever ran into. And it's the only one that I like. There's a couple different ones, but what's nice about this one is that as I push, it increases my speed by 500%. And if I'm going up ramps, inclines, carpeting, things like that, if I go across grass, the computer in here will automatically sense that I'm going across grass and increase the power. So it takes the same effort to go across wood as it does go across grass. It's a great chair. Unfortunately, I shouldn't probably show it because it's not available right now. Johnson & Johnson, who developed it and designed it, they had a company who had the rights to it. They just lost those rights, and it's in limbo right now. But they've really designed it. A lot of the power assist chairs, the problem with it, if you ever do get a power assist chair, try it first. Don't ever, ever buy a power assist chair unless you try it, because the other ones there, it's the right wheel is thinking one thing, the left wheel is thinking the other thing, and if I push stronger on the right than the left, it looks like I'm drunk when I drive them. It's very hard to use a power assist. The thing that's different in this chair is the left and right wheel talk to each other. They know exactly what's going on. It's a very well engineered chair. So I figure probably for the next 3 to 6 months it'll be out of the market, but it will be back because it is a fantastic chair. But all I'm saying, if you use a power assist chair, try it first. Use it first for a couple weeks before you do buy it. Very, very important to try them. Power chairs, if you use a power chair, if I've got spina bifida and I use a power chair, a lot of times they'll ask you, are you right-handed, are you left-handed? If you're going to get a power chair, I'm left-handed. I'm very dominant left hand. If I have function in my right hand, always put the joystick on the right side. Don't put it on the functional hand because, again, remember function. If I want to be functional in a power chair, that means I want my strong hand, my dominant hand, to carry things, turn on and off lights, open and close doors. To operate a power chair takes very little effort. So use the non-dominating hand. It's harder to teach me how to drive with my right hand, but once you teach me how to drive with the right hand, I'm much, much more functional. So things like that. And if I can't get it, if I'm always reaching across to drive with my left hand, it takes me 5 minutes to move the joystick from this side to that side. So little things like that. Think function in every piece of equipment you get. Scooters, brought a scooter. If you are getting a scooter, there's 2 things that make a scooter functional that are very, very important. And the main thing is, if you get a scooter, it must be free swivel. Because a scooter is, you always back into things. You always back into it. You'd be amazed how many scooters they lock in the driving position. And most people think when I'm driving, I should lock the seat. That's the worst thing to do. Whenever you're on a scooter, you must keep the seat unlocked. So if I want to see behind me, I can turn like this and see behind me. Because you back up a lot with a scooter, more so than a power chair or a manual chair. They turn, they spin. But on a scooter, you must keep the seat swiveled. So when I teach a person to drive a scooter, I will lock the seat at first until they get forward and reverse down. But once they've mastered that, before they go out that door, they must keep the seat unlocked so they can swivel and turn as they go reverse. You probably don't see too many scooters, but if you ever do get a scooter for someone, they are kind of nice. They're small, they're compact. I like them because that's what my mom used all the time with her MS, and she used it for many, many, many years. And it was small and lightweight enough that I could put it in the trunk of the car at 10 years old for her. But you have to make sure and get the right piece of equipment. I've had a lot of people say scooters don't work, and the reason is because they don't get the free swivel seat. They get big, bulky ones. There's things, it's just like a wheelchair. It's 10,000 different, well, maybe not as many ways on a scooter, but you have to get the right piece of equipment. Every piece of equipment, I've had people say, I don't like this chair, that chair. 9 times out of 10, it wasn't fit properly for them. So, I think I've covered everything real quickly. If there's any questions or anything on any piece of equipment that you guys want to ask or anything that didn't make sense that I said, Kim has a mic, and there's a guy back there who can get a mic. Any questions? After, if you want me to do anything one-on-one with you, let Kim know. She will make a 30-minute appointment, and I will be available tomorrow in room 207 all day. And we have our tools. You have low pressure in your tires. I got my tire pump, things like that. See her, we've got to do it. Yes. it on? I don't know, right? Speak up.
Okay.
I hear.
Could you explain more in depth what you mean by center of gravity with wheelchairs?
Okay, center of gravity means in order for me to push this wheelchair properly, I have to have a certain amount of my weight behind the back axle and a certain amount of my weight in front of the back axle.
Okay.
If all your weight is in front of the rear wheel, then that makes the chair so it won't roll very well.
Okay.
So the better the center of gravity, the better the chair will roll.
I
That's
just
what it
didn't
is.
understand.
So that's important. So when if I look at your wheelchair, I'm going to draw a line straight up and down from the center of your axle, and then I'm going to see how much of your weight is behind it and how much is forward. If the weight's forward, that means your chair is not going to propel very well. And that's why I want to move you back further. Okay? Well, I appreciate you guys coming. If you need anything, or got the question?
The center of gravity, is that normally right through the shoulders or
Well,
right in front of the shoulders?
to make this wheelchair is a machine. In order for this machine to push your body, the easiest, 50% of my weight should be behind it, 50% in front of it. That would be perfect. But then if I lean backwards, that would shift it and I'd flip over. So it's a little bit different with everybody, depending on how stable you are, things like that. But for someone who has spina bifida, I usually will try to get about, I try to do about 60-40, 35, 65, something like that. But what you want to make sure, it's kind of hard to determine that, but what you want to make sure is some of the weight is behind the back axle. You never want to see a chair with all the weight in front of the back axle. That's bad. Even for a power chair, that's bad. Because a power chair has to have some weight on the back wheel, too. So it works the same for a power chair as it does a manual chair.
Do you work with the rolling standers at all, and is there anything unique about those if you do? The Griftons?
what?
It's like an upright wheelchair.
Oh, yeah, a lot of standing chairs. I think standing chairs are fantastic. I think the Helium, which is a standing manual wheelchair, which is very lightweight and everything, is phenomenal. If I had a wheelchair, I'd probably have a standing one, too. I think I like standing. I got my mom a standing wheelchair, too. Well, the thing with them is, again, you want to get a good center of gravity, you want to get a good seat to floor height, and you want the same elbows. So just because the chair stands, you still want everything, all the properties are exactly the same for standing, and then you can go into stand. But I think standing chairs are fantastic. I love them. So, okay, thanks for coming, and if I need to see anyone, I'll see you guys tomorrow. Yep. Tailwind. The only thing is it might change its name because it changed its name when Next Mobility took it over. Now they don't have the franchise rights for it. They might get it back and they might still call it Tailwind. But the thing is right now it's called the Tailwind. It's a neat chair. Okay, thanks.
Thank you for attending this session. Because meeting your needs is important to us, we need your feedback on this presentation. Please take a few moments to complete our evaluation, which can be located by clicking on the Clicking Here hyperlink on your screen. It will only take a few clicks of your mouse to provide us information to make the SBU experience better for you and others. If you have any questions relating to SBU, please contact us at sbu@sbaa.org.